Linda's husband, a difficult and stubborn man, was not willing to let her go easily. Even after their divorce, he continued to find ways to trouble her. Every time he showed up at her doorstep, it was yet another attempt to demand that she get a job and financially support him. Although Linda no longer owed him anything, she still had to endure his unwanted calls and uninvited visits. He refused to accept the reality that Linda had chosen to leave the marriage in pursuit of a free and independent life. Despite knowing that everything was over, he still wanted to control her life, insisting that she provide him with money, disregarding all reason and emotion. Linda had tried multiple times to avoid him, but he always managed to show up at the most unexpected moments. There were even times when he blocked her way while she was on her way to work, standing in the middle of the road and threatening her. However, fortunately, every time her ex-husband harassed her, there was always another man who appeared just in time to help her. That man was CEO Quang, someone Linda didn't know well, yet he was always willing to assist her in difficult moments. Quang was a kind-hearted and compassionate man. Even though he and Linda had no close relationship, he still chose to help her whenever she faced harassment from her ex-husband. The reason CEO Quang always stood up to protect Linda was not because he had any special feelings for her, but simply because he felt sympathy for her fate. Although he did not know Linda well, he could not turn a blind eye to the sight of a woman suffering emotional abuse and having her private life invaded. He saw the pain in Linda's eyes every time her ex-husband appeared, and that made him feel the need to do something to help her. CEO Quang was a man of principles who always respected people's freedom. Seeing Linda being harassed by her abusive ex-husband, he felt a responsibility to protect her, even though she was a stranger. For CEO Quang, this action was not just about sympathy but also anger toward the man's behavior. He could not accept anyone abusing another person, especially a woman trying to rebuild her life. CEO Quang understood that Linda did not only need material support, but also emotional support and protection to continue living in peace. He also knew that people like Linda needed courageous individuals to stand up for them, and even though he was just a stranger, he felt that responsibility. That is why every time Linda's ex-husband appeared, CEO Quang was always there in time to intervene. He did not hesitate or overthink. He acted immediately to stop the man's actions. CEO Quang knew that people like her ex-husband would not easily give up their intentions, so he remained alert and took decisive action to protect Linda. Every time he showed up, Linda gained more faith in justice and the kindness of people, helping her stay strong in a life full of difficulties and challenges. Thanks to CEO Quang's timely intervention, Linda was able to escape the tense and dangerous situations her ex-husband created. Every time she saw Quang appear, she felt relieved, as if there was an invisible shield protecting her. And although his help was only temporary protection, it gave Linda the strength to face what her ex-husband continued to do. It was not just for herself but also for the truth that good people still exist in this society, willing to stand up for the vulnerable. Linda knew that CEO Quang was not someone she could rely on forever, but she deeply appreciated his support. She understood that in life, there wouldn't always be people like Quang to protect her, but regardless, she would always remember his kindness. Thanks to Quang's timely presence, Linda gradually realized that she could stand on her own, not depending on others, but at the very least she was not alone on this journey. However, Linda's ex-husband was not someone who gave up easily. After multiple failed attempts to confront CEO Quang alone, he devised a new plan. This time, instead of harassing Linda by himself, he decided to enlist the help of his allies. He knew that he couldn't defeat Quang alone, but with a group by his side, things might be different. He called his closest friends and asked them to join his plan. These friends, most of whom were aggressive and willing to do anything for him, quickly agreed to help. With his gang's support, Linda's ex-husband planned to show up at her house on a day he was certain she would be home. His goal was to intimidate Linda and force her to obey him, demanding that she continue providing him with financial support. When he arrived, he didn't come alone. He brought an entire group of men, all of them looking hostile and ready to cause trouble. He believed that with such overwhelming numbers, Quang wouldn't be able to intervene this time. However, what he didn't expect was that Quang was already at Linda's house. CEO Quang was inside when the group arrived. At first, he remained calm, showing no fear in the face of the intruders. He stood his ground, unwavering. But Linda's ex-husband, furious and unwilling to accept another defeat, ordered his men to attack Quang. They rushed at him, trying to push him out of Linda's house, some even intending to physically assault him. Linda, though used to arguments and emotional abuse from her ex-husband, had never seen him this reckless and enraged. She didn't know what to do. Fear overwhelmed her. She could only stand frozen, watching helplessly, wishing for it all to end quickly. Despite the escalating tension, CEO Quang was not someone who could be easily subdued. He stood firm against the violent onslaught of Linda's ex-husband's gang. Quang understood that if he didn't act now, Linda would suffer, not just physically, but emotionally, and he couldn't stand by and let that happen. In that moment, he realized that his actions weren't just about protecting a woman. They were about defending dignity and freedom, both his own and Linda's. He didn't want to escalate the situation further, but faced with the recklessness and aggression of the gang, he had no choice. Quang knew that if he didn't respond immediately, things would spiral out of control, leading to disastrous consequences. However, unlike the others, who were driven by blind rage, Quang remained calm and level-headed. He refused to be consumed by anger, choosing instead to confront them with strategy and resilience. Quang wouldn't allow himself to be beaten without reason. Even though he knew he was outnumbered and that violence often brought unpredictable dangers, he also understood that if he didn't stand his ground, Linda would be in even greater peril. He remained steadfast, determined not to let her ex-husband and his gang harm her. The confrontation was anything but easy, yet Quang stood strong, unwavering in his resolve to protect Linda. He used every ounce of his skill and agility to evade their attacks, ensuring that they couldn't get near her. To him, this wasn't just about physical defense, it was about shielding her spirit as well. He was fully aware of how much Linda had endured, and he knew that without intervention, she would continue living under the shadow of fear and manipulation. Quang had no romantic feelings for Linda, but he felt it was his duty to protect her in her moment of vulnerability. His actions weren't driven by love or personal interest, but by his inability to ignore injustice. What her ex-husband was doing was unacceptable, and Quang was prepared to face any danger to put an end to it. The battle to protect Linda was far from easy, but Quang persevered, even as the situation teetered on the edge of chaos. He believed that his actions in this moment could break the cycle of violence, not just for Linda, but for the sake of justice itself. His mind remained steadfast because he knew that if he didn't take action, these men wouldn't just hurt Linda, they would continue spreading fear and dominance over others. As the attacks became more relentless, Quang realized that there was only one way to truly protect Linda: escape. He couldn't let her endure any more suffering. In a swift motion, he lunged toward her, wrapping his arms around her protectively, shielding her from further harm. He wasn't just guarding her body, he was creating an unbreakable barrier between her and the chaos around them. In that instant, Linda felt an unfamiliar yet comforting sense of safety, even as the world around them spiraled into violence. Without a word, only a determined glance, Quang pulled Linda away from danger. They ran fast, without hesitation, toward the nearby forest. Behind them, the enraged shouts of the gang grew louder as they pursued, their footsteps closing in. But Quang refused to stop. His legs burned, exhaustion threatened to slow him down, but he knew that if they didn't escape now, things would only get worse. The forest was unforgiving. Thick trees and dense underbrush blocked their path, making every step a struggle. But they had no choice but to keep going. They crossed freezing streams, their bare feet aching from sharp rocks and the rush of icy water. Every step was a challenge, but there was no turning back. Quang never let Linda stumble. He held her hand tightly, never loosening his grip for even a second. His determination fueled them both, making them feel as though nothing could stop them. Quang could feel every pounding heartbeat, every ragged breath, but his resolve never wavered. Each time he saw the fear in Linda's eyes, his determination only grew stronger. He couldn't let her fall back into the hands of those violent men. He didn't know how long he could keep running, but he understood one thing: he had to keep going. No matter the obstacles ahead, be it the deep forest, raging rivers, or treacherous terrain, he refused to give in. Every time he caught a glimpse of Linda's terrified expression, his heart filled with an unshakable resolve to protect her. Branches lashed against their faces, icy water soaked through their clothes, but they didn't stop. Quang kept his focus forward. Wherever there was a path, they followed it, ignoring everything else. Linda said nothing, but she felt Quang's unwavering determination. In that moment, she knew he was the only one who could help her escape this nightmare. They weren't running away out of fear. They were running toward something greater: hope. Hope for a life free from the chains of the past. Neither of them knew how far they had run, but it felt as though some unseen force was driving them forward. It wasn't physical strength, it was the power of sheer determination, of someone who refused to give up when another person was in need. In this moment of exhaustion and struggle, neither of them allowed themselves to surrender. Because they both understood one thing: if they just kept moving forward, no matter how difficult the path, the darkness would eventually fade away.
Câu chuyện về một cô gái một mình chật vật kiếm sống tóc khi bị chồng cũ làm phiền, và sự xuất hiện của một chàng trai tốt bụng giúp đỡ, mang đến thông điệp sâu sắc về cuộc sống, tình yêu và sự kiên cường. Nhân vật chính là một người phụ nữ mạnh mẽ, không kém phần tổn thương. Cô phải đối diện với sự đổ vỡ trong hôn nhân và chật vật trong công việc để tự nuôi sống bản thân, khiến thế nhưng những khó khăn này lại chưa phải là tất cả. Người chồng cũ thay vì rời xa cuộc đời cô một cách bình yên, lại tiếp tục gây ra phiền toái và đe dọa sự ổn định trong tâm trí cô. Những cuộc gọi không mong muốn, những mối quan hệ căng thẳng khiến cô không thể thở phào nhẹ nhõm, mà phải đối diện với một quá khứ không thể chôn vùi. Vì vậy, cô gái này trở thành biểu tượng của sự bền bỉ của một người phụ nữ không dễ gục ngã trước hoàn cảnh, dù cuộc sống đã phải đối mặt với cô như vậy. Cô không từ bỏ, không để nỗi đau và áp lực đè bẹp. Cô lao vào công việc, chăm chỉ đến mức đôi khi quên mất mình cũng cần được chăm sóc, cần được yêu thương và thấu hiểu. Cô đặt mọi hy vọng vào những bước đi nhỏ bé hàng ngày để có thể tồn tại và không để quá khứ bóp nghẹn tương lai. Nhưng rồi, khi cô gần như đã mất hết niềm tin vào mọi thứ, một sự thay đổi bất ngờ đến từ chàng trai tốt bụng. Anh là người xuất hiện đúng lúc cô cần, không chỉ giúp đỡ cô về mặt tài chính mà còn là một người đồng hành, một chỗ dựa tinh thần vững chắc. Thoạt nhìn, anh có thể là một người đàn ông thành đạt, đầy quyền lực, nhưng anh không chỉ sống vì bản thân mà còn là một người có trái tim ấm áp, sẵn sàng chia sẻ những người cần giúp đỡ. Sự xuất hiện của anh là một cơn gió mát trong lành cuộc sống đầy khắc nghiệt của cô, mang đến cho cô một niềm tin mới vào những điều tốt đẹp.